Our organization is contracted with different event planners over the years to help us plan, organize, and execute our fundraising events. We always feel dissatisfied with the end result. There isn't that much more money raised, our staff still has plenty of work to do to support our event planning firm, and after expenses, we barely net positive. Do you have any recommendations on how to make the most of an event planning relationship? What's realistic to expect from a firm that we contract with?
Yeah, sadly, this is not a unique question. I hear this come up a lot. People seem like they either love or hate their event planning firms. There's not a lot of in between. And I think there's a few things at play here. I think one, being realistic, if you are hiring an event planning firm, being really super clear, like really granular about what does success look like. Because here's what happens, right? You think the event planning firm is going to raise you a bunch of money. And the event planning firm is like, no, we're here to like make the event look gorgeous and have a cool theme. And like, right? So like there's lack of clarity on exactly what it is that success looks like to you that gets communicated to them. And then some firms are designed to help you figure out how do you raise more money. And some are designed purely for like the logistical coordination, like find the cool venue piece, right? And some do it all. But like if you don't ask that on the outset or get really super clear about your goals, I think that is where the failure comes in. I also think like being really outright, talking to the event planning firm and saying, here's what hasn't worked for us with others in the past. Let's give you some specific examples. Is that the way you work? Like, or how do you work? Like, what do you expect of staff? What is staff's role versus your role? I was actually just talking to an organization not too long ago that was struggling with like event planning firm making decisions that they felt like should have been a committee's decision. And that just comes from a lack of clarity who, where does the buck start and stop? Like who has to actually sign off on something? Is the budget free for all? Like here's the event budget, so go forth event planning budget or firm. Like I just think there's a lot of that stuff that gets mucky. And I also think that it's unrealistic to expect some firm that doesn't, if they have no relationship with your organization, to come in and do work wonders, right? They're like the magic bullet to make it all like perfect when they have nothing to work with. If you have staff that aren't available to them, if you have no donor database, if you have nothing like for them to work with, they're probably not going to be able to pull out the magic wand and make it happen. So like I think it's about some reality checks, like how do they get supported? How do they do this with other organizations that maybe don't have staff time or whatever? So it's a lot of kind of intro conversation, like some really important but tough conversations at the beginning before you ever sign on. So, and of course, then like, having it all outlined in a scope of work and contract, that's kind of a no-brainer. But that's in my mind where I see it fail is something related to that. How about Andy? I'm sort of curious to know what and I know it's an event question, so you and I sometimes roll our eyes at this stuff, but yeah.
I mean, I think you hit it on the head. It's a contractual relationship, so you just need to be really clear on what you expect. I mean, I think that's true of any kind of contract. If you're hiring somebody to do something at the beginning of it, you need to be very specific. This is what the expectations are. This is what you're going to provide. This is what we're going to provide. And then you kind of hold them to it and say, this is what we were expecting out of it. Like no event planning company that I'm aware. I mean, certainly not. Of course, Stacey and I, a lot of our work was done in an environment where an event planning company was like called on constantly to do everything. I mean, there's so many we're in Las Vegas. We were in Las Vegas. There's so many event planning companies, and they really got a very different experience of like what a good event is like, because they're doing every single trade show that's coming in is hiring these same companies to do these just amazing, like super high end top dollar events. And then a charity hires them and is like, well, we've got like $50 and We can give you some volunteer time from some people that are willing to help out. And so you just have to be really clear on what you expect, because in that scenario, the event planners can be like, you want to do what, why? Like, they don't know what fundraising is. They're just there to make people have a good time, which is, as Stacey and I have said, is generally not the point of an event. Like, it's probably not what you're going for. So just be really clear about it. I literally have nothing to add to what Stacey said, even though I just talked for 3 minutes.
No, you know what, Andy? I'm going to, though, piggyback off what you said, because I also think you might benefit from actually asking event planning firms if they've done work with other nonprofits, because I do think those who work with other nonprofits, and let's be honest, the event planning firm has a tough job depending on how involved your board or your committee is, because we know about those committees made up of well-intentioned volunteers who want to argue about the color of the napkin. And that event planning firm is probably not used to it. And it's probably a huge time suck. And quite frankly, for their business, not a great, not very profitable dealing with all of the voices that need to be made. So I also think like someone who understands the dynamics that come with events with nonprofits and the many voices involved also probably would benefit the organization.
Nonprofit governance.
Nonprofit answers.
Nonprofit board. Nonprofit management.
Nonprofit marketing. Nonprofit resources.
Welcome to Nonprofit Everything, the podcast where hosts Andy Shurick and Stacey Wedding answer your questions about all things nonprofit.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Nonprofit Everything. Stacey Wedding here and my fabulous co-host, Andy Shurick. We are so excited to have you joining us today. We are in 2025, and that feels a little surreal to me. How about you, Andy?
I think I'm okay with it. I've gotten to the point where the numbers don't bother me as much as they used to. I don't know why. Like 2025, I think it's cool that it's divisible by 5.
Oh, of course. Of course your math brain would say that, right? I have to say, I want some of the energy. I have been around people lately that have had a lot of sort of energy about, those people who get excited about a new year and they're like, woohoo, look at all these things I'm going to accomplish. And I don't know if I'm just getting old or jaded, but I'm not feeling that this year. So, oh well, it's another day, right? It's just another day.
Yep.
But
just another day.
Yeah, we get through it and life goes on. So anyways, With that said, you're in for a great episode. And as always, you know that our episodes are made possible through the questions we get from each of you. So when you get done listening to today's episode, I am sure it's going to inspire some questions for you. So when you get done after you hit stop or end or whatever you do, shoot us a message. Go to nonprofiteverything.com, go to questions@nonprofiteverything.com, ask us anything and everything that's on your mind. And we promise we will record it in a future episode. So with that said, that's your call to action. Now enjoy the show. Hey, Andy, here's a question for you. I really don't like the concept of all the red tape and jumping through hoops in every direction for a tax exemption. If I have a business and don't realize a profit and redistribute all those funds to the cause as business expenses, wouldn't that be such a better environment to conduct work towards the mission? You could probably argue that we would help more at a higher quality if we didn't have to please a gazillion separate people with how many pennies were spent to do so. Is there a way to do this without the nonprofit status that also wouldn't be financial suicide? Like some sort of in-between social enterprise, business for good status?
Oh, such a good question. Oh my gosh, this is such a good question. And I wish more people would ask it. It's one of those things where this is one of the fundamental, before you even decide you want to start a nonprofit, this is one of the fundamental questions that you should ask. And if we just kind of go back to start with a history lesson, like what charitable status is. So the 501c3, if you fill out a form 1023 to get 501c3 status, what you're asking for is that if I make a profit, I do not want to pay federal tax on my profit. That's it. You're just asking the federal government, is this organization, does it fit into the boundaries that prevent me from having to pay federal tax on any profit that I make? On top of that, if you meet a new set of requirements in addition, you can get 509A status. And what 509A is another section of the IRS code, which says that if someone gives me money, they can then take a deduction on their federal taxes. So they can get a tax deduction for giving me a donation if they jump through a whole bunch of hoops and itemize and make a whole bunch of other money and like, et cetera, right? It's almost impossible for people to get the tax deduction now. So that's almost off the table. So those are those two things that if you want to have those two things, you don't want to pay federal tax on profit and you want to give people a tax deduction for donations to you, subject to their tax circumstances, then in exchange, the IRS wants to know a whole bunch of information. They want to, and it's not like normal information that they would normally need to ask to figure out whether or not you're performing properly, because over the years, more and more regulations have been added by Congress and by others to make the Form 990, which is the tax form that you have to fill out at the end of the year, super complicated, over the top, asking a whole bunch of random governance questions that have no relevance to anything and are completely different. And the reason they've done that is because as soon as you offer the carrot of not having to pay federal tax, you've opened the gates to every scammer in the whole world to say, oh my gosh, here's a way for me to open a business and have to pay no federal tax. And so by opening the scammer gates, they have to add all of these additional regulations to make it a pain in the ass. So they're trying to weed out anybody that really truly isn't doing something for one of the purposes that's described in Section 501c3. So getting back to the question, which is like, so why do I have to jump through these hoops? You have to jump through these if you want to not pay tax on profit and you want to give people a tax deduction for their donations, you have to jump through the hoops. If those two things are not important to you, if they do not figure into your calculations of how your business works, they're extra. They're a bonus. So you do get some, I would say you do get some positive benefit from going through those hoops. Like just because you filled out the 990 and you are a nonprofit in good standing and you do all this work and you've got proper governance and you do all these other things, it does make people more comfortable with you and you're much more likely to get donations. So that's a sort of stamp of approval in some senses that you are doing things right. Like Stacey and I know how low the bar really is, because if you don't make much money, you do the 990N postcard, which means that you can add, and that's about it. Add and subtract, I think. You need to subtract. So the bar is very, very low to do the 990N, but you need to do the 1023 first to get the status to begin with, which is a pain in the butt and takes money and time and et cetera.
So I'm curious, like when you think about like the question about financial suicide, like doing this, would it be financial suicide? I don't know. Like what is your take on that?
Well, I'll ask you this though, Stacey. Like how many times have you talked to people who say like, I've got an idea for a nonprofit, and what they're really describing to you is just an idea for a really stupid business?
Yes.
So
many times.
So many.
I'm so sorry, but yes, so many times. Or it is a covert way to ultimately benefit their business or themselves. Like it has nothing it's not charitable at all.
Yeah. I'll just take a little bit off the top, but we're going to help all these people by doing this really complicated thing.
Yeah.
But it's really just like, I'm trying to come up with like some sort of scam. And it's not really even a scam. It's just like some sort of scenario where I don't have to do any work and all this stuff will magically appear, because if I add this charitable component, there's a subset of people who are so stupid that they will just give me money for no reason.
So sad.
Or my business's idea is never going to make any money because it's such a bad idea. It's so hard to make money doing this one dumb thing. And so if I make it a nonprofit, then that's okay.
Well, and then I think there's also that comes with the assumption of, oh, I'll qualify for all these grants. Oh, I'll get, and like, here's it. I don't care for profit or nonprofit. Like at the end of the day, a bad idea is a bad idea and it's not going to do well either. So there's financial suicide on both sides, right?
Yeah. So the words social enterprise are in here, business for good status. So I think there are such things in certain states. You can get B Corp You can register as a corporation that's got a B Corp, which means, depending on the state and depending on the state law, it means that your shareholders can't sue you from intentionally losing money or intentionally spending money on something that isn't giving shareholders their money back. Because when you think about what a corporation is for people to pool money in an investment and then be able to get the money back out of their investment. So B Corp, if you do your corporation and call it a B Corp, you're explicitly telling your shareholders you might not make any profit from this business, right? If you're a sole proprietor and you're just opening up an ice cream shop and you don't have any shareholders other than yourself, like the B Corp status is ultimately meaningless. You can become a certified B Corporation, which means you're going to do all this extra work, a lot like a Form 990, to prove that you're doing all these other things. And so you can get a third-party certification that you're not horrible. So B Corp certification is something I'm sure that has some, to some customers, that may be a stamp of approval that you're doing good things. There's also, like in some states, they have like a low profit corporation, which is similar to a benefit corporation in that you're sort of saying that you're, again, saying to shareholders, like, we're not going to make a ton of money. But there's no requirement for a corporation to make money at all. So if you really, truly just wanted it, you've got a product. I mean, this is so this is the Newman Zone model this is the generalized Newman Zone model. And there's some other companies that do this as well, which is there is a foundation, which is a 501c3 private foundation. And the private foundation is the sole shareholder of a for-profit company. And all of the profits from the for-profit company go to the foundation. The foundation then gives them to charity. So this is the structure and that law is fairly recent. That law is only it's not even 10 years old at this point, where you're allowed to do that, which then the private foundation would only necessarily pay the excise taxes on that excess profit from that corporation. There are a bunch of other kind of interesting rules around it that prevents it from kind of going sideways. But that's sort of the scenario in which you would have something that does generate cash, but then you want to protect that cash so that you can distribute it charitably. That structure exists there too. But at the end of the day, there's nothing preventing you from opening up an ice cream shop and then just saying, all of our profits are spent as business marketing expenses, which are going to nonprofits. So you could just spend all the money and end up with zero cash or zero profit at the end of the year and not have to pay federal taxes anyway. You just can't take donations because you're not truly a nonprofit. So because if you were truly a nonprofit, you'd have to do the 1023, 990 and all the extra stuff. So I think it's important to be clear about what you're trying to achieve and not just blindly wander into the IRS code and say, this sounds good, I'm going to do this because I think it's going to give me some benefit. You have to if you're starting a business, I mean, for God's sakes, think about what you're doing first and then think, is this the structure that makes sense?
And I don't know, Andy, if you've seen, I can't remember the term, but I've seen for-profit businesses where they'll be like, hey, we really are designed and I'm trying, to do social good in the world. And so and we try to keep our profit margins low so we can, so it satisfies two things. We stay in business, but we also go and do good in the world. And so if you want to donate to support us and just realizing, and I don't know if using the word donation is really fair or ethical, but the reality is they're support our business with just whatever, support social good mission. You're not going to get a tax deduction from it, but how many people can actually, that's a whole other thing, right? How many people are actually writing off getting tax deductions these days? Very few, unless you're really wealthy. So theoretically, this person who wrote could do something like that, right? Am I missing anything with that scenario?
So, and actually I don't want to get too far into it because I don't want to derail the podcast into a corporate shill nonsense, but it's possible to set up a donor advised fund that belongs to that the corporation can then decide how to spend the money, where people could make tax deductible corporations if they feel comfortable with an organization's mission. So you could be a for-profit and take tax deductible donations if you have a foundation. So there's ways to do that. that I've done for people, but don't call me. I don't want to talk to you about it. So that's not what the podcast is for. So the bottom line though really is like if like we've got a lot of these, I can't remember the name of the product because and I probably shouldn't say it anyway, where people just, oh, I will, GoFundMe. Like GoFundMe is a nightmare, right? Because people are constantly asking for donations and what they really mean is just give me money with nothing in exchange. They're not tax deductible. And we've kind of, in the nonprofit sector, conflated donation with tax deductions. Like those two things, because it's been this way since 1942 or whatever it is, we've mashed those two things together and they say the same thing to when you say somebody, give me a donation, the expectation is that there's a tax deduction involved, right? So, and again, to your point, like people can't even take the tax deduction anymore. Like it's so hard to, unless you've got like tons of medical debt or like, and nobody does, or you have a tax guy who's like finagling everything in a crazy way to be able to make it work for you. So that tax deduction is almost completely off the table. So yeah, it's a great question. It's a great question.
It is a great question.
Our board development committee is preparing for upcoming elections where the board terms will be renewed. They have decided not to invite back one of the board members because the person has hardly attended any board meetings, not served on a committee we assigned them to, and also hasn't fulfilled their annual give-get commitment of $5,000. There's more I could share, but I won't bore you with the details. What strategy do you recommend for blessing and releasing this board member at the end of their first term, not inviting them back for a second term?
Ooh, that's always fun, isn't it? Gosh, nobody likes to be in this position. So I would start with saying, do you have a board commitment form of some kind, whether it's like a board job description with board expectations on it, of what it means to be on your board? Anything like that was given to that board member at the beginning of their board service or their board term is super helpful in conversations like this, because you kind of have that to fall back on as long as you had some sort of process of sharing expectations and what that, the board member was supposed to do a give get, the board member was supposed to serve on a committee, because otherwise, if it's not something that was done, you really have no leg to, yeah, you can make this decision, but you don't really have any leg to stand on. And that's not really fair and looks discriminatory and all those things. So hopefully you have something like that, and that you shared it. Now, even with that, I want to take a step back and say the challenge with it is that I am a believer that volunteers, including volunteer board members, need reminders. And some people are like, no, they are adults. They should be able to do what, right? That someone should be able to say to them at one point in time, this is what we need you to do, and they should just do it. But the reality is they have day jobs and lives and a million other things. And so the challenge is if this board member that was never like told they weren't stepping up, or like someone didn't reach out to them, the board chair didn't say, hey, like you've been missing a lot of meetings and we really need you here, or hey, I know you signed that board commitment form and gosh, like has something changed? It doesn't feel like some of this is being met, or are you doing okay? Like what's going on? But there's got to be some kind of conversation, almost like you would do with an employee, where you tell them, where you give them that heads up, like it's almost like that nice, friendly verbal warning before, slash, right? So I am just a believer that should be done. It doesn't sound like that probably is what happened. I'm making a lot of assumptions here. If that did happen, all the better. But then it's just simply, I think one of the ways you do this is simply reaching out and thanking, it can be the board chair or if you have a governance committee, the governance committee chair can reach out and say, hey, just wanted to let you know your term is up for, coming up at the end of the year. And we just wanted to thank you for your board service and hope maybe you'll be at the final board meeting of the year. Like you could do it like that. The challenge is at that meeting, if you're also going to now renew terms of some people, that person may be like, you might get questions, right? They might be like, why are others getting renewed that I'm not? So there's some of those nuances, but I think ultimately it can be like, just, hey, heads up, you're coming up. We want to make sure you're there for your final board meeting. And at that point, if there are questions, the person may bring it up. Or if you want to try out another term, then this is the time to say, listen, we know that like you haven't had a lot of time and been able to do some of this. And so we need to make sure before we think about whether a term renewal makes sense for you and kind of where you're at in your life and the organization. Are you going to be able to do this? Because we're really starting to, this is important, and we're starting to put, bake in some more accountability. So that's, I think it has to happen. There's a lot of ways you could slice and dice it, and it could just be the straightforward way I said of just, thanking them and telling them their last board meeting's coming up, or it could be a more nuanced conversation of, hey, are you able to truly commit because you haven't been doing what you needed to the first term? But let's be honest, like, it's, Andy, you know this better than anybody. What's the worst thing when you were in a class project or a group project and one person did all the work and nobody else did? Like, awful, right?
Yeah. I was usually the one doing the work, right? And that's like only probably because I'm a control freak and need to make sure it's exactly the way it's supposed to be and don't really trust other people to do their pieces quite as much. I'm better at that now, but back in the day, I was like, no, we're going to do it my way. So I think, one of the things we've talked about it recently, is that board members really only spend a little bit of their brain space on your organization at all. They're doing their own thing. They've got their own business to run. They've got a personal life, and they only start thinking about you as a nonprofit, like when the board packet arrives. And then like, maybe if you're lucky, in the drive into the board meeting, if they're going to drive or waiting for the Zoom call to start or whatever it is, right? That's the only time they're paying attention to you. And so if you put yourself in that position, like maybe there needs to be more direct engagement to that board member to let them know that there are expectations that they need to be working on. So like just like you said at the beginning, is like, you can't just hand it to them and expect them to say, like, I know these are my commitments and I'm just going to go ahead and do them all, because they may be the kind of person that just kind of needs friendly reminders occasionally. Like, here's, just so you know, these are the things that we expect. How can we put this on a calendar for you to help you remember to do it? Right. So if we're going to do this needs to be done by this date, and then like a check-in to say, we said we were going to do this by this date. We have this give get. We're coming up on the end of the year. How are you doing on yours? What can I do to help you get to that? If you're not going to make the gift yourself, how can we work together to figure out where we're going to get it from? Like, having that communication and not being surprised that someone that's a volunteer is not doing something just of their own volition. Right. So yeah, I think having a conversation with the board member, especially if they're a good board member and you want them on the board, like, really trying hard to figure out, like, how are we going to make this work together as a team? On the other hand, if it's like, so one organization I worked with in a town with a lot of big companies, and one of the things that the organization felt like they needed was like, each one of the big companies needed to have a member of their company like on the board. Like, and it's probably partially misguided. They thought that if we have this person on the board, then we're more likely to get a gift from that corporation, like, or they gave us money year after year. And if we don't have a person on the board, they'll forget about us or give it to somebody else. I mean, maybe that's why they were there. But there was one company in particular where we'd say, hey, who do you want to be, to the company itself? Like, who do you think from your organization should be on our board? And they'd say, oh, this guy, he's great. Bring this guy on the board. And so we put him on the board, and he just didn't ever even show up to a meeting. He didn't even like RSVP. He was just like completely not there. The company gave us a check at the end of the year, which was really nice. And it was a significant amount. It wasn't like $50. It was like enough. And, but then we would go to the company. We'd go, look, this guy like doesn't appear to be interested. He didn't go to the gala. He wasn't interested. He didn't do any volunteer activities. He didn't show up for a single board meeting. Like, is there somebody else? And they're like, no. This is totally the guy. 100%. This is the guy that you want on the board. And for years, we just kind of had that same little loop where it's just like, I don't think we're getting the best out of this organization because of this one person. And I don't know for sure. I'm not there anymore. But to this day, that same guy may still be on the board, like having never participated in anything.
That is a great story. And I would just echo, there's so many things like that. And I go, it's so much of this. and Andy, you and I hear this a lot when it's already a problem or it's already a challenge, or now you're at the stage to have the awkward conversation, right? And I go, the best way to avoid that is to have it to be clear up front, to make sure you do those, you set up the board member for success. Because imagine if you were going into an organization you knew nothing about, you're a board member joining you don't even really know exactly yet what it means to be a board member. And now you're told to do these 5 things. And you're sort of like, okay, I mean, it's kind of like first day of school, right?
Yeah.
It's a little overwhelming. And so thinking about that, put yourself in their shoes, and how do you kind of bring it forward so that, how do you set them up for success by making it clear, reminders, finding ways to engage them to help them with their give get. Because, just saying, 5,000 give get, like, unless someone just has the money to write you out the check right then or give you the donation, then like, they're going to be like, well, how do I go about doing that? Like, right. So I always say, like, think about it like you would the best employee, like an employee that you are so excited you just brought on to your organization. How would you like treat them, take them through the process? Like, if they weren't doing what you thought they should be doing, wouldn't you talk to them along the way and hopefully not wait for their 1-year performance, their annual performance review and be like, hey, you're out? Like, so let's try to do the same thing for our board members. And because also, let's not demoralize and discourage the rest of the board. That's the worst. Like, no one wants to be like you and I, Andy, when we were the ones working on the project and nobody else did. Nobody gets held accountable for it. And you go, so what's the win-win for me?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point. I think my perspective on it changed because I wasn't, when I started my nonprofit career, I wasn't immediately in the boardroom, right? You start at the bottom and then eventually they'll let you in. I think until I was actually on a nonprofit board, I don't think I really truly understood this. I think so from being a staff member, even though I'm executive level and I'm participating in board meetings, I still didn't really understand what it was like to be a board member until I was actually a board member. And being put in that position where somebody like expects you just to be, you're a professional, you're an executive, you're walking in, they expect you to like be a self-starter and just know how to do everything. And me as a long-term nonprofit employee, like I did know how to do a lot of things because I've been in this for a really long time. But even then I still felt like I'm kind of out of my element a little bit and I'm not quite sure what I should be doing exactly. And for me, it was like, I don't want to overstep, right? Because I know my personality. I'm just going to be like, okay, here comes the train, get out of the way. I need to like maybe dial it back a little bit. Yeah. And, I want to help, but I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to be a bulldozer. So what do I need to do? And so each individual board member is kind of coming from a different place. So just like you said, having some sort of something that you can bring them in and say, okay, this is what the expectations are and this is what they mean. How can I help you reach them? I think that would be really, really nice to have. Thanks for joining us today, everybody. We appreciate that, number one, that you work in the nonprofit sector because we know, Stacey and I both know very, very well that sometimes the job feels like really hard. And we're just past the holiday season. We're starting a brand new year. Maybe it's a new budget year and you've got some new people coming on board and that's always fun. But we appreciate that you're doing that. And we thank you for staying in the sector because there's so many people that are just like, forget this. I'm going to go open a dry cleaners or whatever. Right. So thanks for sticking with it because we now more than ever, we need you and we need your help. Please send us questions. We thrive on questions. If you can't think of one, think of one you would hope someone else would ask. I know in most episodes, potentially we seed them. We say, hey, somebody should ask us this. Maybe you could be that person. We appreciate that. Also, share it with folks. Be sure to give us some feedback. You can go to the Nonprofit Everything webpage where we've got 170 something episodes of history with every possible question you think you could imagine about every topic is on there. So thanks. We'll see you in a couple of weeks.